It was at a party, one of those loud, chaotic gatherings where the air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, that I first met her. The room felt like it was spinning, not from alcohol, but from the overwhelming energy of youth surrounding me. At 70, I had grown accustomed to quieter evenings, books by the fireplace, perhaps an old jazz record playing softly in the background. But here, amidst the pulsating music and vibrant faces, I felt ancient, irrelevant, like a relic misplaced in time. My suit suddenly seemed out of place among the sleek modern outfits, my posture stiff compared to the carefree sway of younger men. For a moment, I considered leaving, retreating to the safety of solitude, and then she appeared. She was radiant, glowing with a vitality that made everyone else in the room fade into shadows. Her eyes locked onto mine as though she saw something no one else could, a hidden spark, a fire buried deep beneath years of self-doubt. "You're incredible," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a melody. "I've never met anyone like you. So wise, so strong, so magnetic." Each word hit me like a tidal wave, washing away decades of insecurities. She spoke as if I were some kind of masterpiece, a man who had lived fully and triumphantly, whose every wrinkle told a story worth cherishing. Her admiration wasn't subtle, it was intoxicating. With each compliment, she painted a version of myself I barely recognized, a man still desirable, still capable of igniting passion in another's heart. She called me charming, saying my age brought a depth no young man could replicate. It was surreal, almost too good to be true. In her presence, I didn't feel old. I felt reborn. Every glance, every smile she gave me felt electric, charged with possibility. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to dream again, not just of love, but of redemption. This wasn't just about romance. It was about proving to her, to the world, to myself that I hadn't lost my edge. That even at 70, I was still worthy of being adored, respected, cherished. But looking back now, I realize how vulnerable I truly was. Her words weren't just compliments, they were lures, hooks cast into the fragile corners of my ego. I thought I'd found salvation, but what I discovered instead was far more dangerous, a reflection of myself I wasn't ready to confront. At first, the cracks in their relationship were so subtle that they seemed almost harmless, like faint ripples on an otherwise calm lake. She began with gentle suggestions, her tone always veiled in concern, as if she were merely trying to help him improve. "You should take better care of yourself," she'd say, tilting her head slightly, her lips curling into what appeared to be a supportive smile. Or, "Maybe you could try exercising more. It's good for your health." Well, to anyone listening, these comments might have sounded innocuous, even caring. But beneath the surface, they carried a weight that slowly began to crush his self-esteem. He told himself it was nothing, just her way of showing she cared. After all, hadn't she once praised him for being strong and capable? Hadn't she called him wise, saying no younger man could ever match his depth? Those early days had felt like magic, a second chance at life itself. So when she made those small critiques, he brushed them aside, convincing himself that love required compromise, that patience would eventually smooth over any rough edges. But the cracks didn't stay small for long. They widened, spreading silently until they threatened to shatter the fragile foundation of their bond. The tipping point came one fateful evening after a trivial argument. He had forgotten to buy her flowers for their date night, a simple oversight, something anyone could easily overlook. Yet instead of brushing it off or gently reminding him, she lashed out with a coldness that froze him to his core. "You don't really understand what women want, do you?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Maybe you're just too old to get it anymore." The words hit him like a hammer striking glass, shattering whatever fragile confidence he still clung to. That night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, her voice echoed endlessly in his mind, replaying over and over again like a broken record. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the implication that he was outdated, irrelevant, incapable of meeting her needs. For days afterward, he found himself questioning everything: his worth, his ability to love, even his place in the world. But the worst was yet to come. Their intimacy, which had once been a source of connection, became a battleground where her criticisms cut deepest. What started as playful teasing, "You're not as fast as you used to be, are you?" escalated into outright humiliation. One night, during what should have been a moment of closeness, she turned to him and said, "I deserve more than this. I can't keep waiting around while you struggle to keep up." Her words weren't just hurtful, they were devastating. She compared him to younger men, painting vivid pictures of vitality and vigor that he knew he could never compete with. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how much effort he poured into pleasing her, it was never enough. Each comparison felt like a dagger twisting in his chest, leaving him breathless and broken. It wasn't just about sex, it went far deeper than that. Her remarks chipped away at his identity, reducing him to a caricature of inadequacy. He began to see himself through her eyes, an aging man desperately clinging to the remnants of his youth, hoping against hope that he could prove himself worthy. Every glance in the mirror became a confrontation with failure. His graying hair, once a symbol of wisdom, now seemed like a cruel reminder of his decline. His slower pace, once a testament to a life well lived, now felt like evidence of his obsolescence. Even his attempts to please her, which had once been acts of devotion, now felt hollow, mocked by her laughter and casual indifference. And yet, despite the growing pain, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Love, he thought, was supposed to require sacrifice. Wasn't enduring hardship the ultimate proof of commitment? He clung to the fleeting moments of warmth she occasionally offered, the rare smiles, the brief reassurances, as if they were lifelines keeping him afloat. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. The man who had once stood tall, proud of his experiences and accomplishments, now felt like a shadow of himself. He was trapped, not just by her words, but by his own need to prove his worth to someone who refused to see it. The breaking point came not with a bang, but with a series of quiet humiliations that chipped away at what little self-respect he had left. It was after a dinner party, a gathering filled with her friends, all younger and seemingly more vibrant than him. He had spent days preparing for this night, wanting to impress them as much as he wanted to please her. Every dish served was carefully chosen. Every word spoken was measured, designed to show how cultured, how witty, how relevant he still was. Yet despite his best efforts, it wasn't enough. Not for her, not for them. As the evening wore on, she turned to the group, her voice laced with mockery disguised as casual humor. "He's trying so hard, isn't he?" she said, tilting her head slightly in feigned amusement. The room erupted into stifled giggles, polite smirks, and exchanged glances that felt like daggers slicing through his soul. Her words weren't just cruel, they were calculated, aimed straight at the fragile armor he'd been clinging to. Each laugh from the crowd echoed louder in his mind than any insult ever could. For the first time, he realized the depth of his own degradation. He wasn't just losing himself, he was being paraded as a spectacle, a relic of another era whose desperate attempts at relevance were met only with ridicule. That night, alone in his room, he stood before the mirror, staring at the man reflected back at him. His eyes, once bright with determination, now looked hollow, weighed down by exhaustion and despair. "Who are you?" he whispered aloud, his voice trembling. The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered except by the silence around him. In that moment, clarity struck him like lightning, painful, blinding, undeniable. He saw himself as others must have seen him, a shadow of who he used to be, bending over backward to win approval from someone who refused to give it. Where had the proud, confident man gone? The one who had lived boldly, loved deeply, and carried himself with dignity? Somewhere along the way, he had traded his identity for scraps of affection, allowing himself to become a ghost, haunting the edges of his own life. But the true gut-wrenching revelation came days later, when he stumbled upon something that shattered whatever fragile hope he still clung to. While scrolling through her phone, an act born out of suspicion rather than malice, he found messages exchanged between her and a younger man. Their tone was flirtatious, intimate, brimming with promises of excitement and adventure. One message read, "You're everything I've been missing." Another teased, "Can't wait to see you again." Each word pierced him like shards of glass, cutting deeper than any physical wound ever could. Confrontation followed swiftly, driven by anger and disbelief. "What is this?" he demanded, thrusting the phone toward her, his hands shaking. Instead of guilt or remorse, she laughed, a cold, biting sound that made his blood run cold. "Are you jealous?" she sneered, arching an eyebrow in disdain. "Do you really think you have the right to control me?" Her words stung worse than anything else because they weren't just dismissive, they were dehumanizing. She didn't even acknowledge his pain, treating it instead as a petty inconvenience, a sign of weakness. In that moment, he realized the full extent of his entrapment. This wasn't love, it was imprisonment, a toxic web spun from manipulation and deceit. Every attempt to prove himself worthy had only dug him deeper into a hole where his worth was constantly questioned, his dignity stripped bare. He wasn't fighting for her anymore. He was fighting to reclaim the pieces of himself he had lost along the way. The night the storm broke, both in the skies and within him, was one he would never forget. Rain lashed against the windows, a cacophony of thunder and lightning setting the stage for what felt like the final act of their tumultuous relationship. They had been arguing for hours, her voice rising with each passing moment until it became a shrill crescendo that pierced through his soul. "You can't make me happy," she spat out, her words cutting deeper than any blade could. "I deserve more than this." The sentence hung heavy in the air, echoing louder than the thunder outside. It wasn't just her dismissal of him, it was the cold certainty in her tone, as if she were pronouncing judgment on everything he had ever tried to offer her. That single declaration shattered whatever fragile hope he still clung to. He had endured so much up to this point, the subtle jabs about his age, the comparisons to younger men, the way she made him feel invisible despite his desperate attempts to prove himself worthy. But this was different. This was the culmination of every doubt, every insult, every moment of self-loathing wrapped into one devastating blow. For years, he had convinced himself that love required sacrifice, that patience would eventually yield understanding. Yet now, standing there under the weight of her words, he realized how wrong he had been. He couldn't keep giving pieces of himself away to someone who refused to see their value. Determined to confront her once and for all, he sat her down the following evening, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshaken. The rain continued its relentless assault outside, mirroring the turbulence inside him. He spoke calmly at first, choosing his words carefully, explaining how her behavior had slowly eroded his confidence, how he no longer recognized the man he saw in the mirror because of the way she treated him. But before he could finish, she erupted, her voice sharp and venomous. "You're selfish," she screamed, her eyes blazing with fury. "All you think about is yourself. Do you even care about my happiness?" Her accusations hit him like waves crashing against rocks, threatening to pull him back into the same cycle of doubt and insecurity. But something inside him had shifted. For the first time, he didn't falter. He stood firm, not out of anger or spite, but from a quiet strength born of clarity. "No," he replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Love shouldn't come at the cost of losing myself. I've given enough." His words surprised even himself. They were foreign yet empowering, unfamiliar yet liberating. She stared at him, incredulous, as though seeing him for the first time. But he didn't waver. Not anymore. The final scene unfolded like something out of a tragic film. As he packed his belongings, she followed him around the house, pleading, screaming, accusing. When he finally reached the front door, suitcase in hand, she lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "You'll regret this," she yelled, tears streaming down her face as rain soaked her clothes. "You'll be alone forever." Her voice cracked with desperation, but he knew better than to look back. With a deep breath, he pulled the door shut behind him, leaving her standing there amidst the chaos of wind and water. Each step away from the house felt heavier than the last, but also freer. For the first time in years, he walked without chains binding him to someone else's expectations. And though the storm raged on around him, he felt an inexplicable sense of calm, a peace that came not from external validation, but from within. The days following the breakup were a descent into darkness, a void so profound it felt like being swallowed whole by an endless abyss. He had always imagined freedom would bring relief, but instead, he found himself drowning in waves of despair that crashed over him without mercy. The absence of her presence left behind a silence so deafening it echoed through every corner of his life. Meals went untouched. Sleep became an elusive stranger. Nights stretched endlessly, each hour feeling heavier than the last as memories of their time together haunted him like ghosts refusing to leave. One afternoon, while driving home from a grocery store trip that yielded nothing but expired bread and forgotten hope, his mind wandered dangerously. His hands gripped the steering wheel loosely, his thoughts spiraling into a vortex of regret and longing. A sudden honk jolted him back to reality just in time. A car screeched past, narrowly missing him. His heart pounded violently against his chest, sweat beading on his forehead as he pulled over to the side of the road. Trembling, he stared at the dashboard, realizing how close he had come to disaster. It wasn't just the near accident that shook him. It was the realization that his pain had begun seeping into every aspect of his existence, clouding his judgment and threatening to consume him entirely. That night, sleep eluded him once again, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it a dream both vivid and terrifying. He stood on the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping fiercely around him, tearing at his clothes and stinging his skin. Below him stretched an infinite chasm, black and bottomless, beckoning him forward. Each step toward the precipice felt heavier, yet something inexplicable urged him closer. Just as he raised his foot to take the final step, a voice pierced through the chaos, not hers, but his own. Enough, it said firmly, cutting through the storm. Startled awake, he sat bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat, his breathing ragged. As dawn broke through the curtains, bathing the room in soft light, he made a decision. No matter how unbearable the weight of his grief, he would fight to live. Slowly, painfully, he began piecing himself back together. Yoga became his sanctuary, a quiet space where he could breathe deeply and reconnect with his body, which had felt foreign for so long. At first, even holding a pose for more than a few seconds seemed impossible. But with each session, he grew stronger, steadier. Writing in a journal provided another outlet, allowing him to pour out emotions too raw to speak aloud. Words spilled onto pages, messy and unfiltered, capturing moments of anger, sadness, and eventually glimmers of hope. And then there was painting, a hobby he never imagined pursuing. With trembling hands, he picked up a brush one evening, dipping it hesitantly into vibrant hues. What started as clumsy strokes transformed into bold expressions of color and form, each canvas a testament to his resilience. Months passed, and though the scars remained, they began to fade, becoming part of the tapestry of his story rather than open wounds. One crisp autumn day, while sipping coffee at a cafe, he heard a familiar voice call his name. Turning, he saw an old college friend, someone who had once admired him greatly, but whom he hadn't seen in decades. The man approached, eyes wide with disbelief. "I can't believe it's you," he said, shaking his head. "You've changed, in the best way possible." They sat down to talk, reminiscing about shared memories and catching up on lost years. When asked how he managed to overcome everything, the man replied simply, "By choosing to see myself clearly." His friend nodded thoughtfully, adding, "You're extraordinary, you know. Not everyone has the strength to rebuild themselves after something like that." For the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled, not out of obligation or pretense, but because it came naturally. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and warmth, he realized he wasn't merely surviving anymore. He was thriving. The lessons he learned were not just revelations. They were lifelines that pulled him back from the brink of self-destruction. Sitting alone one evening, sipping tea in a quiet corner of his home, he reflected on everything he had endured. What struck him most profoundly was the realization that true love wasn't about sacrificing every piece of yourself to please another person. It wasn't about bending your soul into shapes it wasn't meant to take, or silencing your own needs for the sake of someone else's fleeting approval. Real love, he understood now, was built on mutual respect, a foundation where both partners saw each other as equals, not as projects to be fixed or trophies to be displayed. Society, however, had always whispered cruelly in his ear. The pressure to prove himself, to show that age hadn't diminished his worth, had been relentless. Advertisements glorified youth. Relationships seemed to favor vitality over wisdom. And even casual conversations often carried undertones of judgment. But through the storm of external noise, he found clarity. What truly mattered wasn't how others perceived him, but how he chose to see himself. Wrinkles weren't flaws, they were maps of a life fully lived. Gray hair wasn't a sign of decline, it was evidence of resilience. Age didn't make him irrelevant, it made him irreplaceable, at least to those who understood the depth of his journey. One crisp autumn afternoon, while sitting at a cafe with a book in hand, something unexpected happened. She walked in. The girl, the same woman whose words had once torn him apart, was there, radiant as ever, her presence commanding attention. For a moment, time froze. His heart skipped a beat, not out of longing, but out of disbelief. Had fate decided to test him again? Or was this an opportunity to confront the ghosts of his past? She noticed him almost immediately, her eyes widening slightly before she approached cautiously. "It's you," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. There was no mockery in her tone this time, only curiosity and perhaps a hint of regret. He looked up from his book, meeting her gaze steadily. Where once he might have crumbled under the weight of her scrutiny, he now felt a calm assurance. "I never thought I'd see you here," she continued, pulling out a chair without waiting for an invitation. Her movements were confident, but there was an edge of nervousness in her demeanor. He studied her quietly, noting how little she had changed physically, yet how much he had transformed internally. "You look different," she added hesitantly, searching his face for answers. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you," he replied simply, closing his book and placing it gently on the table. There was no bitterness in his voice, no trace of the resentment that had once consumed him. Instead, there was peace, a profound sense of closure that surprised even him. She leaned forward, her expression softening. "I heard you've been doing well, traveling, painting." Her words trailed off, as if unsure how to continue. He nodded, acknowledging her attempt at conversation. "Yes, I've been rediscovering myself," he admitted, "and learning to live for me, not for anyone else." Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she looked away, visibly unsettled. Perhaps she hadn't expected this version of him, the man who no longer sought validation, who carried himself with quiet dignity. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I'm glad things worked out for you." He tilted his head slightly, studying her reaction. Then, with a warmth that startled even himself, he said softly, "I wish you happiness too." It wasn't spiteful or dismissive, it was sincere, a final act of goodwill towards someone who had once meant so much to him. As he rose from his seat, leaving behind the remnants of their shared history, he felt lighter than he had in years. She stared after him, bewildered, unable to reconcile the man before her with the one she remembered. Walking away, he realized the full magnitude of his transformation. He was no longer the man who clung desperately to illusions of love. He was someone new, someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more whole. The decision to travel the world came not as a whim, but as a deliberate act of reclaiming his life. A journey he had dreamed of for decades, yet always pushed aside out of fear or obligation. For years, family responsibilities and societal expectations had tethered him to routines that left little room for personal aspirations. But now, with nothing tying him down except the weight of newfound freedom, He felt ready to chase what once seemed impossible. He packed lightly, leaving behind more than just possessions. He shed the doubts, regrets, and insecurities that had accumulated over a lifetime. His travels took him across continents, each destination offering its own lessons in resilience and joy. Yet it was in a small Italian village, nestled between rolling hills dotted with vineyards, where he found an unexpected kindred spirit. She was an elderly woman named Rosa, whose hands bore the marks of years spent tending her garden and kitchen. Her laughter echoed through the cobblestone streets, drawing him in like a magnet. One afternoon, as they worked side by side planting sunflowers, she shared wisdom so simple yet profound, it stopped him in his tracks. Happiness, she said, wiping soil from her fingers, isn't about age. It's about the heart. When you water your soul with love, everything else blooms. Her words resonated deeply, stirring emotions he thought he'd buried long ago. As they cooked together later that evening, her teaching him recipes passed down through generations, he realized how much beauty there was in slowing down, in savoring moments rather than rushing through them. The vibrant colors of fresh tomatoes, the aroma of basil mingling with garlic, the warmth of shared stories, all of it reminded him of the richness life still held, even after loss and heartache. When he returned home months later, he carried more than souvenirs. He brought back a heart overflowing with gratitude and peace, inspired by Rosa's teachings and his own transformative experiences. He sat down to write a book, a testament to his journey of self-discovery. Each chapter poured onto the page like sunlight breaking through clouds, capturing both the pain and triumph of rediscovering himself. He wrote not only for himself, but for others who might feel trapped in relationships or circumstances that dim their light. His message was clear. No matter how dark the night, dawn will come if you dare to seek it. The final sentence of the book became his mantra, a declaration of hope and defiance against all forces that sought to diminish his worth. Don't let anyone take away your light. Love yourself because you deserve it. Those words weren't just ink on paper, they were armor forged in the fires of his struggles, protecting him from ever doubting his value again. As readers turned the last page, many found themselves reflecting on their own lives, inspired to embrace their uniqueness and confront their fears. And though the man no longer yearned for external validation, knowing his story touched others filled him with quiet pride. In sharing his scars, he had become a beacon of strength, a reminder that true happiness begins within.